Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Lyndall Manson and I'm the Director of Governance, Policy and Projects at TAFE Directors Australia. I would like to welcome you all to the first TAFE Talks of 2024 on overcoming skills gaps in a skills-based economy. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are all meeting on the lands of the traditional custodians right across Australia. I'm coming to you from Naarm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to any First Nations peoples who are joining us today. If you would like to say hello and introduce yourself and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that you are currently on, please feel free to do so in the chat. So we have a really interesting TAFE Talk session lined up for you today. I think it's going to give us all a little bit of a glimpse into the future in terms of how we learn and work as we move more and more towards a highly skills-based economy. Or maybe the future is already here. Our presenters today will be exploring how we can meet skilling and upskilling needs through micro-credentials and how we can connect education and career pathways through digital credentials. To lead this discussion, we are joined by one of TDA's valued corporate affiliates, Learning Vault. I would like to introduce Nicholas Robert Alderdice, who is the co-founder and Chief Executive Officer at Learning Vault. I sincerely thank Learning Vault for its support to TDA and for leading our TAFE Talks session today. I would also like to introduce Sally Ann Browner, who is a Senior Manager at TAFE New South Wales's Institute of Applied Technology. Sally will be discussing the new tertiary education offering and current micro-credential strategy at the Institute of Applied Technology Digital at TAFE New South Wales. So in terms of the format for today, I will be handing over to both of our speakers shortly, and we will allow some time at the end for some polls and for some questions from the audience. So we encourage you to stay on the line for that. If you have a question for one of our presenters, please type it into the Q&A box throughout the session. Just so that everyone is aware, today's session is being recorded and the recording will be made available to everyone who registered for this TAFE Talk session and also on the TDA website. Please also note that closed captioning is available for this event. It now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Nicholas from Learning Vault to kick off today's presentation. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you so much, Lyndall, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Just, I guess, to give a high-level background on myself and Learning Vault, as Lyndall said, my name is Nicholas Robert Alderdice. I have the pleasure of being the CEO of Learning Vault and am a co-founder of that business. Learning Vault ultimately is a technology company focused on education and really looking at that intersection of learning through to work and how that entire process works. Largely, we operate across three domains. We have education content as a service, which we call Education Vault. And then we have our two sort of larger lines that we focus predominantly on, being digital credentials or Credential Vault, as well as a talent mobility piece, which we call Talent Vault. But ultimately, the entire reason that this subject is so important to us is we believe wholeheartedly in helping with that transition through learning to work. And then when you're in that workforce, how you can sort of go from an entry-level role right through to making that a lifelong career, and how education can interplay throughout that process. Sally, do you want to introduce yourself?
There we go. Beautiful. Wonderful. Thank you very much. I would love to introduce myself. Thank you very much. Sally Browner. I am the Senior Manager of Operations at the new Institute of Applied Technology Digital. As Lyndall said, I'll be talking a little bit more about what we're doing now, but my background, I call myself, I'm Gen X, but I've behaved like a millennial. I think I'm on my fourth career change. I started out sort of in merchant banking, advertising. I then decided to give back and became a teacher. And I ended up getting into running coding boot camps, ran the first accredited a coding bootcamp in Australia, and also launched and founded an Indigenous-owned tech education company called Goanna Education. And I've now found my way into the government, and I am thoroughly enjoying myself, passionate about how we drive the skills of the future and really make them as accessible to as many people as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sally. And, it's always a pleasure working with you and talking about, I think, one of our favorite sort of topics together.
Absolutely.
And I guess on that, I really sort of wanted to paint a picture around, I guess, the construct of this particular session and why we are so passionate about it. And I guess starting with what we're seeing as a global trend across the market, more specifically in that macro environment, and that is that we're really starting to see that the workforce is moving rapidly towards that skills-based economy. Obviously, a lot of us have been in education for a period of time. Everyone's been talking about the importance of skills, but now we're really finding that we're in a skills-based economy, and the pressure of that is really starting to ramp up. We're starting to see this monumental shift in how we learn and how we work. One of the biggest things that we are seeing is feedback from industry, irrespective of what vertical that industry is, relating to skills shortages and how we can rapidly get more people into that workforce to help solve some of those workforce-related issues. We're seeing ever increasingly that skills gap and divide is getting larger and larger. And Brendan O'Connor, Minister for Skills for Training, recently acknowledged to the AFR that this is the worst skills crisis in 50 years. So if we understand that the landscape of employment is changing, and if we think about our roles in the last 12 months individually and think about how much change there's been in any of the roles that we do within 12 months, and how we're hiring people and the skills gaps that are emerging in what we do, we need to focus our attention for learners in terms of the learners that we are currently interacting with to help put into workforce of tomorrow and how we're actually being able to support and assist that. There's a great need to be able to provide the employers of tomorrow and today with the workforce that they need, the skills, the knowledge, and the proficiencies that individuals have that they will need as well. So what we need to focus on is how we can provide individuals with agency that can actually rapidly upskill, rapidly acquire knowledge, rapidly get that level of proficiency that they're required to then be deployed into the workforce. And what we're finding now is that workforce planning is more important than ever. And technology and the use of being able to deploy short, sharp, high-impact, tailored programs is the only way that we're going to be able to look at solving that. So as an overarching macro trend, that's definitely what we're seeing in the space. And the fantastic work that IATD is doing specifically under Sally's sort of leadership there is fantastic from a micro application of a use case relating to how we can address some of those problems globally. Sally, it'd be fantastic if I could then encourage you to sort of share with us some of the micro-credential strategies that you've deployed.
I would be delighted. I'll give you a little bit of background as to, for those people on the call that aren't across what we're trying to do with the Institute of Applied Technology Digital. So the vision for the Institute of Applied Technology Digital or the Institutes of Applied Technology came from the Gonski-Shergold Review a couple of years ago. And the idea was that there was this need for new tertiary education offering. And I mean, I think we can see the Universities Accord report came out the other day, and we're seeing the Institute is mentioned a couple of times in there, and we're seeing the same calls for that integration of tertiary education happening. The idea behind it is that we wanted to bring the best of theoretical university education, the best of practical vocational education, all while being industry-led, and put that all together and be able to have a targeted and efficient manner of meeting the, upskilling the skills gap, or, reducing the skills gaps. And I think the idea is that it's not to replace university. It's not to replace TAFE. It is to add to the ecosystem and to become this lifelong learning hub where people can pick up those skills that they're missing, really in an efficient and effective manner. So, and I think, it's doing it in a highly collaborative way, which is one of I think the points of difference. So we've got some really amazing partners. We've got, I think the next slide goes to, we have 4 foundation partners. So we've got 2 university partners. So Macquarie University, University of Technology. Obviously, TAFE New South Wales is a foundation partner, and also Microsoft is our foundation partner. But we have a range of other industry partners, and they are all then part of our working groups that then help lead the product development that is specifically targeted to meeting the needs of employers out there in the market right now. And you can see them up on the screen in front of you. The sort of 4 key principles about co-innovation, co-designing, co-delivering, and co-locating. And again, creating programs that are there, where there is nothing wasted. It is all about getting people the skills, the applied skills that they need to be immediately useful in the workforce today. So we can probably jump to the next slide. For those that aren't across the idea of a micro skill and a micro credential, these are the 2 different sort of tools that we're using at the moment. The micro skill is short and sharp, and at the moment they're a fully subsidised program that's sitting on our website, and anybody can access those. They are up to 5 hours long. They're a taster. They're an introduction to our key discipline areas of artificial intelligence, cloud computing, data analytics, and cybersecurity. And you get a certificate of completion when you have worked your way through that micro skill. It's all self-directed learning for the micro skill. Micro credentials is a bit different. So they are aligned to the Australian micro credentials framework. And if you're across that and you're sort of thinking, yes, but what's the difference between a short course and a micro credential? In essence, a micro credential is where you've had to measure yourself against a specific framework, like the Australian micro credentials framework. You've had to, demonstrate that you've got, clear learning outcomes. You've got verified assessments, that you are working with key partners in a manner to verify those, the credentials and the work that is being done in that learning. So we have 8-week programs. 6 of those is you've got about 2.5 hours of synchronous learning, and then there's about, depends on the degree of the credential, but between another 7 to 10 hours of self-directed learning each week for each of the credentials. And you get a micro credential badge, and most of our credentials also include various industry certifications as well. They're stackable, and most of them have some degree of credit-bearing ability into university qualifications or TAFE higher education qualifications. So that is, and again, we have credentials. I'll take you through that in a second in terms of, if we can just jump to the next slide. We have 5 key discipline areas. So you can see data, cyber, cloud, AI, and software. This is, again, an evolving space. So as market need evolves, we need to meet that market need. So, for example, if quantum computing looks like there is a huge rising demand for a specific skill set, then that's potentially an area in which we will move and look to be creating micro-credentials. You'll see cybersecurity is one of our biggest areas. So we have a large number of credentials available in that space. The blue and the red differentiate between foundational and intermediate. Foundational level is really for those people that are coming from outside of the tech space. They have no prior tech skills. Intermediate are for people that have prior skills or have potentially done other of the foundational micro credentials. So the idea is it is really an opportunity for those that are both reskilling and those that are upskilling in the space. And look, I would just say that, for example, our data area has been the single most popular, I think because it is the most versatile and it goes across so many different industries. We've just seen it, and because it is accessible to, I think, the broadest range of people. So if we just want to jump to the next. I think the other thing that is important here is micro-credentials are swift and efficient ways of upskilling or reskilling, but really it is also about pathways. People want to understand. We actually had a webinar last night on cybersecurity, and you could just see the huge demand. We had, sort of 700 people RSVP, huge number of people turn up, and what they all want to know is, I'm in this space now, I'm a biochemist or I'm an architect. What are the things that I need to do to upskill in or reskill in order to get me down a certain pathway to get towards a certain job role? And that is really what we're here to try and help map out. If people don't want to go back to uni and do a 4-year degree, what are the ways that they can leverage micro-credentials in order to achieve some of those outcomes? So, for example, if you're coming from a non-IT background or you're a career changer, what are the certain bundles of credentials that you might be looking to do, whether that's in AI, whether that's in data, whether that's in cloud, whether that's in cyber? We also then offer work integrated learning experiences, so you can layer your bundles of credentials with specific work integrated learning programs that come and are organised with our partners. So, for example, we've got a SaaS work integrated learning project that is launching in the next couple of months, based around data analytics. So again, that will be run partly at the IAT, partly with SaaS, taught by SaaS staff, and again, really designed to help fill the gaps in the market where there's a big demand for people with SaaS analytics skills. And then, as I said, the pathway then goes into potential job outcomes. And I've just highlighted there, that's particularly the data pathway. Just as I said, the data has been one of our most popular areas for people looking to upskill and reskill. So if you just want to jump to the next slide. And this is just to drill down, I guess, a little bit. And if you want to, you can just press all of the this is just to, I guess, drill into the idea of the bundle, like what makes up a bundle, and then the stackability, because I think the other key thing about micro-credentials is you need that exchangeability, that currency. It needs to be readily exchangeable somewhere else. And I think this is what links in really nicely, Nicholas, with what Learning Vault does, which is the future is about being able to take the skills that you're learning here and be able to articulate those skills to anybody. It doesn't matter if you're going to an employer in Sydney, doesn't matter if you're going to an employer in New York, you should be able to carry your digital credentials and express them in a way that is meaningful to any employer, regardless of location. And I think that's still a work in progress, but I think there's some really exciting movements towards making that happen, and really exciting to see Learning Vault playing a massive role in that, I think. So again, we've got our data bundle here, and what does it exchange into? You can, if you go and complete that data bundle, you can go and pick up a couple of units at Macquarie Uni in computer science. You could go and pick up a couple of units at UTS in data. You can pick up a couple of units at TAFE Higher Ed, should you wish to. And in some instances, a lot of our mature students, they're not necessarily going to go back and do that bachelor's degree, but what they see that currency as a measure of the credibility of the credential as much as anything else. So yeah, I will pass back over to you, Nicholas, because you are obviously the doyen of digital credentials.
Thank you so much, Sally. And as I said, I love hearing so much around some of the incredible work that the IATD is doing, and it's fantastic to regularly be able to talk to you about some of those things. If I can pull on one of the themes that you were sort of saying towards the end there around that mobility piece and being able to articulate what skills or knowledge someone has, for us at Learning Vault, and just as people that work within the education and technology space, being able to ensure that somebody has the ability to articulate the skills or the knowledge or the proficiency that they have is actually a really big thing. And one of the things that certainly a lot of people bandy around on a global basis is the fact that not everyone feels as comfortable articulating different things that they have or they own. And largely that's one of the promises of digital credentials. And that's why globally we think that they're such an important aspect within that learning to work transition. And certainly why we're starting to see it as as an expansive utility used across that space. I mean, 72 million credentials have been issued as part of the credential count that we took part of in January, which just speaks to the acceleration on a global basis of that. I guess one of the questions that that gets asked a lot is what actually is a digital credential? So we thought we'd sort of go through a little bit of a deep dive to that with the context of what we've just learned about a micro-credential and a micro-skill and how it relates to that. One of the first things that I'm going to cover off is the difference between a digital badge and a digital credential. Digital badge was the term that ultimately has been used for a long period of time to articulate a piece of older technology now. The reason why the term digital credential is used a lot more is ultimately as a result of different standards that are adhered to. For any of my friends that are in compliance on the call, welcome. Ultimately, I love compliance, which is weird, but that's fine. But if we're starting to look at different levels of compliance to frameworks, this is where the term digital credential becomes really relevant. So there are a multitude of global standards. A digital credential adheres to W3C compliance and Open Badges 3. That is important for later on down the track as we start going through that. But a digital credential is really important. Ultimately, what it consists of is a visual graphic, which we can see there on the left, as well as a series of what we call metadata. Metadata is just a term for machine-readable information. One of the most important aspects within a digital credential is the fact that it can actually be validated. So this verification protocol also becomes really important when we start thinking about the construct of employment and speed to employment. So when we opened today's session, we were really talking about some of those macro trends around requiring skilled labor to enter that market. And so digital credentials assist with some of the speed of that. Now, if we take a deeper dive into what a digital credential might look like, and if I can ask that we go to the next slide, that would be amazing. We've created a mock-up here based off one of the programs that Sally was talking about before. So you see on the top left there, we have that beautiful graphic. So if anyone clicked on that, let's say it was part of an email signature or part of a digital resume, this is what opens up. There are a couple of things in here for any digital credential that's important to understand. And the first part is that endorsement section. So Sally was talking earlier around the credibility and the importance for some of those mature age workers and the fact that there's this authenticity stamp, this proof of validity in terms of I've actually been awarded this and it is serious because it is from Microsoft, UTM, or TAFE New South Wales, etc. So that's really important. What we're looking at here is this visual component of a credential, what's called a credential assertion page. And within here, in text, is actually written all of this important information. So to what Sally was saying, maybe there's a capstone project. There's definitely application of workforce in there. Definitely the things that were actually learned throughout that program, the duration of that program in terms of hours. You'll see that there's a verification protocol. So somebody can click on that and verify that in real time. To Sally's point, if somebody was in New York applying for a role, that person in HR can click on that and it will run a process and say, yes, this was verified. More importantly than that is the things that you cannot see within this. And this is where that term metadata or machine readable information comes into play. All of the information that is held within here can actually be read by a computer. And that allows the computer to be able to make some pretty interesting calls around capability quite quickly, but we will circle back on that in a minute. But you see here the importance of laying out all of that information that relates to everything that I've learned in a program. So the acquisition of that skill, knowledge, and proficiency. And what we see the credential doing, the digital credential, is being a representation of that award in a digital context. And part of the problem that we are seeing in terms of that global landscape is employers being able to understand to what level somebody has a skill that can fix that gap within that transition from learning to work, but understanding from an employer's viewpoint that skills gap issue. And if we can go to the next slide, one of the things that I'm going to be talking about at a really high level is this concept of rich skill descriptors. There's a brilliant Australian company out there called Edelex that we work with, and they specialize in rich skill descriptors. For my friends from compliance, a rich skill descriptor ultimately is the defined definition of a term aligned to a framework or a taxonomy. That can be ANSCO, that can be AQF, rich foundation skill, or things like this. But a rich skill descriptor is a definition of an individual term that can then be used. So I understand that sounds a little ethereal for some. So let's look at teamwork as an example. Let's say we have teamwork level 1, teamwork level 5, and then everything in between. Teamwork level 1 might be Nicholas can interact in a team environment and ultimately does what he is told and does not disturb the people around him, as the foundation case for teamwork level 1. Teamwork level 5, on the other hand, might be can lead a team, can delegate out tasks to that team, can understand how to resolve conflict should that exist within that team. So those definitions of teamwork ultimately can exist on another web page, and you can literally just have teamwork level 1 as the rich skill descriptor. So if that is on that credential that we saw on the other page, somebody can click on that and understand, go down the rabbit hole of exactly what teamwork level 1 means, look at which framework that adheres to, and all of these things. But a computer can actually immediately ingest and understand that in real terms. So rich skill descriptors are very, very important. Another concept that's important within credentialing and what we would say is good credential practice on a global level follows on from what Sally Ann was talking about in relation to that student journey or that pathway. And if we move to the next slide, what we'll see is that there are also pathways that exist within credentials. So if we think back to Sally's slide around data and that flow of I'm starting here, this is where I am today, and this is where I want to be in the future. And there's obviously been a gap analysis done at the IATD to understand what that process looks like. This is a visual representation of that from credentials. So there is certainly a way of being able to digitally represent an education experience of credentials. But one of the things that we find really interesting is thinking about a pathway in terms of employment. So let's say I start working at ABC Technologies. It's my first day. And I've got an 18-month trajectory to go from where I am today to ultimately another role within that business in an 18-month window. And there could be 10 steps in that process. That can be a defined pathway. I might receive a credential for completing my onboarding training. I might then receive a credential from the IATD as part of a program that I need to do in order to sort of get to where I'm going as part of that journey. I might need to do AWS or Microsoft certification as part of that journey. But ultimately, a pathway not only needs to be educative, but it can also be in terms of workplace oriented as well. One of the things that we're really starting to understand is how organizations can actually get involved in the design process of understanding from a human capability viewpoint. If my staff are all here at this particular level, and in 12 months, I'm going to need more leaders over here, more technical specialists over there, they can actually start workforce planning their own groups of people as it relates to skill and doing skills gap analysis to be able to look at plugging those and using credentials to be able to do that through organizations like the IATD or TAFEs or universities and non-accredited learning providers as well. We're really starting to see this interconnection of skills, knowledge, and proficiency acquisition and how that can be proved to help plug those skills gaps that industry really, really need. So one of the questions that then gets asked is, okay, I've completed this IATD program. I've got my verifiable credential. What do I do with it? And again, if we're looking at it from a macro perspective, there's a lot of conversations that are taking place globally, but specifically in Australia, around skills passports, skills wallets, and all of these things. And if we go to the next slide, we are literally going to spend a moment or three talking about a digital skills wallet. And ultimately, the term digital skills wallet, digital skills passport, skills wallet, my skills passport, all of these fun names, they ultimately just refer to a repository. So this is a repository where people can put all of their credentials. The reason why earlier when I was talking about standards and I brought up W3C, the reason why I talked about how important that is if we start to think about lifelong learning and we start to think about our journey at school, our journey in vocational, technical, polytechnic or higher ed, and corporate learning, lifelong learning, we're going to have all of these different experiences with all of these different providers. So we need to be able to ensure that anything that we receive and put into that space is interoperable, or else it becomes redundant if we're landlocked to particular environments or systems. And that's what a digital promise around verifiable credentials that are interoperable really is. It gives individual agency to the recipient of that piece of information, that credential, to be able to put that wherever they want, whether that's the Service New South Wales application, whether that's in their Google Wallet or their Apple Wallet, whether that is in a National Skills Passport, whether that's in a private paid account, because there are private paid wallets out there. All of those credentials can persist in a space like that, which I think is very important. One of the things that is inherently critical when it comes to skills wallets is the ability for the individual to be able to curate what they want to share with whom, when, and how. So let's just say I have a few credentials for various micro credentials that I've completed. Maybe I have my statement of attainment in first aid. Maybe I have my diploma of leadership and management from a TAFE. I have all of those as verifiable credentials in my repository or in my digital skills wallet. Maybe I have two of the references that I've done from a previous job. Maybe they're bound as a verifiable credential. And of course, I have my identity as a verifiable credential as well. So I now have all of these individual things, these credentials, in a repository, in a skills wallet. I can then send all of that anywhere I want, that I have agency over, and I can recall that, I can terminate that, I have full control over all of that information. So when we're then starting to look at bringing this back to connecting learning to employment, this is where we actually start thinking about how powerful credentials can actually be. There are a lot of products out there at the moment. There are more that are growing relating to that recruitment ecosystem and that environment. And if we move to the next slide, we're really looking at how information in real time can actually be used to help inform judgments. So if we think about for a moment the example that I gave around having some micro credentials, some full certificates, some reference checks, and my identity, all as verifiable credentials issued from various TAFEs, issued from various employers, and issued from the government as it relates to identity or private identity checkers. Let's just also, for fun, throw in there that I've had a police check and that's a verifiable credential. I can actually put all of that into an ecosystem, and that ecosystem for employment, and let's just say I wanted to work in the aged care space. An employer can go into that environment, if I've opted in, of course, and they can say, you know, here's a job description. Here's a job that I need a candidate for. If I am eligible for that, so let's just say my first aid, my diploma, my short courses were all relevant to that particular job description, automatically, without me doing anything, all of the credentials and the rich skill descriptors and the level of understanding has automatically been reviewed in real time. Let's just say that this job description required teamwork level 5, and some person was happy enough to give me teamwork level 5 at an IATD credential, let's just say. It would stack rank and shortlist me as the #1 candidate for that because I meet all of the criteria and I'm fit for work. So that means I can be hired instantly. So when we're starting to think back on that macro problem of the skills gap, and looking at that transition from learning to work, speed to hire, and job shortages, there is this promise within this ecosystem of being able to have verified information that's immediately fact-checked that can actually facilitate that rapid deployment of a candidate into a job based off the fact that they've actually got this skill, knowledge, and proficiency from an organization such as IATD that can facilitate that growth and that movement within the employment ecosystem. So I've been rambling a little bit. I apologize for that. It's a subject that I get quite impassioned about. Sally, how do you see that intersection of learning through to employment and some of the things that you're doing? I mean, I know that there's a lot of just-in-time training created, well received. How do you sort of see that whole ecosystem?
Look, it's so interesting what you were saying there, because I think, look, one of the examples, and I'll give it based on my previous experience as much as what we're doing now, is I've worked a lot in upskilling people in areas like data analytics and even into data science. And when you go out to employers, historically, one of the big challenges is a data analyst at one company isn't necessarily the same as a data analyst at another company. And I think one of the game-changing things about what we're doing here with digital credentials is when you get down to rich skill descriptors, when you can get so granular in the way that you are describing, so that you can be genuinely really clear that you are talking about exactly the same thing, and that is the thing that gets verified, then you can have that genuine you can map out somebody's pathway into a career or into a job in a specific type of analytics. Maybe it's financial analytics, maybe it's whatever it happens to be. You can map that out using these credentials in a way that is so much easier for an employer to understand. And the other thing is you can also map it to other frameworks that also have credibility and value much more quickly than you can. I mean, if anybody on this call has ever mapped any of their learning to things like Sophia or, other cyber frameworks, for example, generally speaking, that's a very long, laborious process. Like, the opportunity with these is that those sort of, if you break these down properly, that process should be quick. You should be able to align those different frameworks to the credentials that you're building and the learning that you're building super quickly. And that person's pathway, then again, that language that you're communicating to the employer, this person is sitting at a, Sophia level 3 in software engineering or whatever, as well as also having the other communication within that credential, it suddenly makes it so easy for both the person who's trying to do that journey, but also the employer to understand where that person's at. So I think that's, if I don't know if I've, again, rambling, but if I was going to articulate it, it gives it just the clarity and the richness of what you are able to express in a ways that we have never had before, and at speed that we haven't had before. So, and it just reduces the load on people enormously.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that example across Sophia is a brilliant one. I remember having the fun of for government cross-referencing Sophia with the digital fluency from the DSO.
So, yeah.
And then looking at that across the digital literacy license that was deployed in Queensland. And it gets rid of a lot of the time, as you sort of said, in terms of being able to give the utility to the recipient. And if we keep coming back to the importance of the learner having the agency to be able to articulate their level of skill, knowledge, or proficiency, and have the employer at the other end looking at that, being able to make a judgment call, that ultimately is the essence of what education should be.
I would also say I think this is something that the vocational space has been across for a long time, which is breaking things up into, units of competency and skill sets and things like that. But it hasn't necessarily been the same in higher education. And now, speaking as somebody that has gotten halfway through I'm halfway through an MBA, I got halfway through a grad cert in data analytics, but you have nothing to show for that. And this again is, you can talk about the units you've done, but it's not very. If you have a way of expressing and building up that profile and that the units that I've done and the competencies that I've developed and the skills that I have demonstrated could be way better articulated in this new world than they have been historically. And I think, I'm not alone in that. I think that if we're moving to a world where you have closer alignment between higher education and vocational education, if we can get to that point where people can express the skills that they've learned across both of those different educational systems more clearly, even if they haven't necessarily 100% completed, their bachelor or their graduate certificate or their whatever it happens to be, then, that is so much better for the learner than it has been previously.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, we've had many conversations with people across different industry verticals, and if we look at aged care just as a microcosm of that, and you start talking to organisations that are doing the training of that, and they're just sort of like, we're trying to efficiently upskill every single student to get their certificate 3 or certificate 4 or DIP. So that we can help fulfill the requirement in that job shortage area. I think that's incredible. But you start talking to the employers, and the employers are just sort of like, if they've done these 3 units, if they're partway through this program, we'll take them because we need this. So it becomes quite an interesting concept when we start looking at how the education layer in the middle can actually help transition students into that learning experience, provide them with everything that they need in order to be able to get that employment, and then help the employers who just really want skilled labor to be able to come in and do that. It becomes quite an interesting process.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Lyndall, I'm led to believe that there are polls.
Yes, that's right. So I hope everyone is paying attention, because we're going to ask a series of questions around the audience's experience with micro-credentials. So if you bear with us for a moment, but thank you very much, Nicholas and Sally, for that really, really great presentation. We'll do the polls, and then we do have some questions in the Q&A box, which we'll come back to once everyone's had a bit of a chance to look through these questions, which should be up on everyone's screen now. And there are 7 questions to get through. So the answers are flowing in, but I will give everyone a little bit more time. I think there were 7 questions there. About a third of you have answered so far, which is great. We're up to a 70% participation rate with the poll. I think some people are having trouble seeing the pop-up poll screen. We might want to close down the slides if we can now, maybe. Okay, so we've got a 75% participation rate, which is pretty good. Are we happy to end the poll now and have a little bit of a look at the results? So, can everyone see that up on their screen? How many? I'll go through the results because I think it's interesting to have a quick look. How many of the audience have completed a micro-credential to upskill or reskill for work? So, quarter have, a few less have, but was limited relevance to their work, and 2/3 haven't completed a micro-credential yet. How do you perceive micro-credentials? So nearly half of you think they're worth the hype. Bit over a third moderately worth the hype, and then about 15% are a bit underwhelmed. So addressing the skills gap. In your experience, what is the biggest barrier to bridging the skills gap within your organisation? So the highest answers were for aligning training with industry needs and evaluating and recognising skills effectively. And then 14% for access to quality learning materials and engagement and motivation of learners. Number 4, how likely would you be to ask your employer to subsidise you to complete a micro-credential? 37% of you are extremely likely, 44% likely, 17% unlikely, and 2 extremely unlikely. So it seems it's acceptable now to expect an employer to subsidise you to complete a micro-credential. Number 5, digital credentials awareness. How familiar are you with digital credentials and their potential impact on education and employment? So a third of you very familiar, 46% somewhat familiar, and 20% not very familiar. Bit of a mix there. Skills wallet in practice. Can you see a digital skills wallet becoming a valuable tool for your learners in the job market? We've got 38% saying definitely it's a game changer, 54% possibly with the right implementation, and then smaller numbers unsure or unlikely. So a very small number have said that it's unlikely to make an impact. And last question, what primary advantages do you anticipate when thinking of implementing digital credentials for TAFEs? And the biggest one is the verification and shareability of achievements. And then that was 50% of you answered that one. And then 38% was career and employment pathways for learning. And then the other ones were 8% workforce planning and industry alignment and 4% for cost and administrative. So some interesting outcomes there. So I think we can close the poll results now. Thanks for that. And we do have quite a few questions in the Q&A box, which we've got a bit of time now to have a look at. I think there is a lot of interest in the concept of the digital skills wallet and the digital skills passport. Obviously, the government has just finished its first consultation on the concept of a national skills passport, and the Accord report has just come out as well, encouraging further development of that concept. So, Nicholas, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about how you see the digital credentials and systems interfacing with skills passports. It's when we were thinking about it at TDA, we sort of felt it's like a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you could have a passport that's just about AQF qualifications, and then the other is basically every certificate or reference or anything that you've ever done, and really it's probably something in the middle. And the ability to verify is essential. But there are still a lot of challenges, I guess, and a lot of questions for people as to how it would all work in practice. But I do have to admit that listening to you talking through that presentation, it started to become a bit more clear to me about the types of credentials that are verified that could be put into a wallet. So that's one piece. And then another person has asked, if learners are to have agency over their skills wallet, should it have the ability to showcase self-attested experiences? And that speaks to the verification question as well. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Nicholas?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you so much to Elaine and Amanda for popping those great questions in. Um, I'm a very strong advocate that all credentials, be that AQF or non-AQF, should actually be able to be placed within a skills wallet. If we think about a skills wallet as that repository of skills, anything should be able to go in there, in our opinion, if it is from a verified source. So there are a number of organizations out there that can issue verifiable credentials, if that makes sense. We work with a lot of non-education providers. We do a lot with Scouts. We work with schools. We work with a lot of industry associations, etc. So if you think about those, they are not AQF accredited institutions, but they can, of course, offer unique learning experiences, skills, knowledge, and levels of proficiency that otherwise would not be able to be issued by an accredited organization. So we're very strong advocates for that. If we think about it just super quickly in a school context, maybe I was not academically gifted, but maybe I was part of the Student Representative Council. I did co-curricular activities in terms of debating. Maybe I was head of drama club. All of these things actually tell a really strong narrative about some of the skills and characteristic traits that I have, that an employer or a educational institute would actually be really interested to understand about me as I transition from learning to either further study or the workforce. So we're really strong advocates for that. And our mandate when we've done federal government consulting around skills has always been anything that is issued from the source of truth and therefore is a verified instrument should form part of any form of wallet or passport, depending on who you're talking to at various levels. The question around self-attestation for me is quite a spicy one. And I've got some unique views on that are shared with some counterparts globally. When I was talking to Europass, so Europass is the European version of a wallet system they have. And for years, we'd sort of argued back and forth around the importance of self-attestation. One of the things that they found is when they saw a mass migration of people from one territory to another territory, sadly, that was during a conflict zone, they had a lot of people that self-attested for skills that they actually didn't have, predominantly around building and construction, so that they could actually get meaningful employment. So that was a system that, in that context, self-attestation did not work. If we think about that school example, I think it's really important that a learner or somebody has the ability to put forward that they believe that they are strong in these particular skills, knowledge, or proficiencies, and therefore self-attesting that they have that. I think any system of record should actually take that weighting into consideration, i.e., if you were ingesting your credentials into a talent system, that talent system would not actually look at any of the weighting around self-attestation because it's not verified and it's not independent. So it's interesting. We do some work with a school, and that school allows students to self-attest to their career advisor. Their career advisor then has the ability to bind that into a verified credential as I believe that this attestation from the student is correct, and so therefore it's a verified credential. But I have extreme caution being able to let people say that they can do all of the things because, in hospitality, I used to have people that wash dishes refer to themselves as underwater ceramic technician. So I would be remiss to allow people to go all bowl with self-attestation. Sally, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you're I think while it sounds lovely, I think there is risk there, and I think the premise on which it functions is that it needs to be verified, and why do people go back to that trust is so critical to a system working, and if we all know that people will bend the truth, unfortunately, so we need it if we're going to trust in it and it's going to work and it's going to allow us this amazing exchangeability and qualification and be able to add up non-accredited qualifications in a whole new way. That verification is kind of key to it then having value, I think. So yeah, I'm same as you. I would err away from self attestation. She says, not able to say the word.
That's okay. I've got another question. We'll move to you, Sally. It's around the Institute of Applied Technology. It says, will the Institute of Applied Technology Digital look to partner with industries that need tailored digital skills, for example, agri-tech, medtech?
Yeah, look, I think that's a great question. And the short answer is there is lots of options on the table for us. So, we've got our first 5 disciplines, but where we head next, there is still opportunities for us to partner with industries to get involved. I would also say there are other parts of the government initiatives like Centres of Excellence that are also stepping into various sectors that will be looking at some of those areas themselves. So it will just depend on, 1, industry demand, and 2, working with other parts of government funding to make sure that we're not, I guess, doubling up. So short answer is definitely on the cards, but making sure that we're not cutting into other people's or other areas that are already being dealt with.
Right, and we do have a few more questions around the concept of the National Skills Wallet and Passport. We've got a couple more minutes. We've got a question around the digital divide and if there are any ideas around how those with minimal access to technology or bandwidth will fare in this new digital world. That's one around the access and equity. And then we've also had a question around data safety and security issues. Nicholas, do you want to have a?
I was going to say, Nicholas, do you want to take the data safety with respect to the digital credentials, and then I'm happy to have a chat about the accessibility.
Yeah, for sure. So verifiable credentials ultimately become the agency and are owned by the individual recipient. So there is a unique relationship that happens. So there is a unique relationship between the issuer and the recipient. So in this context, let's just say I'm TAFE XYZ. I issue a credential to student Sam Williams. That relationship only exists within those two parties. So the relationship with TAFE is that they can actually revoke or expire that credential if at any point in time they realized, let's just say it's a blue card or white card, or yellow card or gold card. They can then say at this point in time that has expired and the credential expires. Or if for some reason they find out that that credential should not have been issued, they can manually revoke that. The second thing is the recipient. So that recipient, Sam Williams, can actually share that credential anywhere they would like, and they then have control over that. So let's just say I wanted to put that into a talent environment, and then at such a time I did not want that to be there anymore. They can remove that, and it ultimately disappears. From a privacy viewpoint, it relates to every vendor. So I'm just going to talk for a whisper of a moment about Learning Vault. We are GDPR compliant against Article 28 because we operate both. We've got head office in Australia and a head office in London, and the GDPR is higher than the Australian privacy principles. So no one has access to that data, and they have the ability to be unknown in an environment. So I can sort of say, look, I don't want my credentials to be part of that system anymore, and they're completely removed. Therefore, the credential is no longer valid in itself, but I wouldn't share it with anyone. Super quickly before I hand over to Sally in relation to access and equity, we've built everything for us for people that have any form of technology or access to that. So we have a web application, so access to the internet on any device will allow that person to be able to access and receive their credential. We do work with large cohorts of people that do not have access to that. So again, from our viewpoint, that is a vendor requirement. But Sally, over to you.
Yeah, I would just say that what we're doing in that space in terms of, so there's a few things. we've got a huge amount of scholarships coming up for underrepresented groups to make it fee-free, make it free for those groups. That's one level of accessibility. From an access to technology point of view, as an example, at Meadowbank, where we're based, we have huge lending kiosks for laptops. So if you don't have a laptop, you can come in and make use of that. Now, that works if you live in that vicinity. So obviously, if you are living regionally and remotely, what we are doing is we're working with the TAFE connected learning centres, again, to try and make that. So even if we're running the course with the educator sitting in Meadowbank, or the educator might be sitting elsewhere around New South Wales, the connected learning centre with their resources and facilities are opening up there, to try and make it, again, as accessible for people to access the equipment and the training as possible. But I think there are always limits to what you can do. So I would say we are working really hard to minimize that, but there's always more that could be done.
Thanks, Sally. So we're out of time today, but I just wanted to say a really big thank you to Nicholas and Sally. It's been a really interesting and topical discussion. We've had great engagement as well from the audience. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. Our next TAFETalks session will be on the 20th of March on the impact of artificial intelligence on TAFE compliance and operations. So if you're interested in registering for that one, the details are on the TDA website and in the TDA newsletter. Thank you again, everyone, and goodbye for now.